Well, another area though where we seem to be moving towards not just an intensification of the front lines, but also further escalation, even widening the war, would be the attacks on different energy and maritime infrastructure. That is, we see that the targets, of course, of the energy infrastructure goes a bit both ways. That is, Ukraine and NATO are targeting Russian energy, not just through a sanction, but also attacks on refineries, now also attacks on civilian vessels. And as we saw in the Mediterranean, it's hard to imagine that, of course, Ukrainians acted alone. This seems highly unlikely, but of course, the Russians are also going after Ukrainian energy and ports to reduce Ukraine's capabilities to attack in the Black Sea. What do you see now being the strategy on the Russian sides? Because I heard many warnings coming out of Russia that if its assets are attacked in the Black Sea, then well, the natural reaction would be to sever Ukraine from the Black Sea. But how are you reading all of these attacks occurring now, especially in the Odessa region? Because it's not just the energy infrastructure. We see the ports, bridges. It's quite, yeah, it's been very, well, I guess, defining of the past 2 months.
Well, let's begin with the fact that this isn't Ukraine attacking. There may be a Ukrainian somewhere in the group, but this is the UK. Flat out, this is British intelligence. This is British drones, even if they slap "made in Ukraine" on those drones. What's interesting is some of the targets have been hit. So the Turks have been made to look fools because shipping is being hit inside their exclusive economic zone. One of the ships that was sunk was actually carrying sunflower oil. Not sure how much of an ecological disaster that'll be, but it's not fuel, at least. So we'll see. Maybe fish eat sunflower oil. But there was a lot of it that was leaked. So luckily, the two oil tankers that were hit were empty. They were coming in for fueling. But the interesting is they were heading. First of all, they were heading toward. They were under third country flags. They were heading toward Novorossiysk. And the damage in Novorossiysk is interesting even more because this wasn't Russian facilities that were hit. This was the Caspian Transit Consortium that was hit. Earlier this year in the summer, their offices were hit by Ukrainian drones. Another port facility of theirs was hit. And this time, their loading facility was hit and destroyed. It's no longer being, it's not capable of being fixed. And who owns the CTC? Well, Russia does have a small stake in the CTC, but the CTC is owned first and foremost by Kazakhstan, who has been putting their behinds on two seats. We'll be friendly with Russia, and we'll hold all the sanction regimes to somewhere in between. Oh, and we'll help feed Ukraine. Well, you get what you get when you help feed Ukraine. Turkey got the same thing. So now they can't export the majority of their oil because that's where most of their oil went. So they're losing billions. It may bankrupt the government because that government literally does live off of oil and gas. Who else owns that? Oh, the U.S. owns that. So American assets have now been destroyed by the British. I'm not sure how much of how much of a conflict that's going to cause, but I'm sure Americans weren't too thrilled to find out that their facilities that they helped pay for are now longer operable and will not be operable in any of the near future, which cuts down into American oil imports and American revenues. Interestingly enough. So I'm sure that's probably fit into Trump's position at least somewhat, because Trump does represent the oil lobby as well. He hears from them and he represents them. They are powerful in the U.S. What else has been hit? So a Chinese tanker has been hit, and that was in the Mediterranean heading to Russia to fuel up in Russia. And at this point now, we're starting to hit the really, it's no longer just Russia being drawn into this war, but the Europeans. Because let's admit it, I mean, where the Western Central Europeans are doing this, it's not the Ukrainians. Unless the Ukrainians have free travel with weaponized equipment through, Greece? We're talking about Greece, more likely is where these drones came from. How do you find a tanker in the middle of the sea to bring a drone in before its fuel reserves go? Satellites. You have satellite data. If it's not the U.S. giving the satellite data, the EU has more than a few satellites over the area, including the UK, that are given that can give live satellite feeds. where these tankers are located. Again, it's one thing if it's in a port, it's a whole different thing. It's out to sea. Sea is a big place. People don't realize that oftentimes when they look at a map and see, oh, see, there's a map, there's a little tanker about icon there. Yes, but that's millions of square kilometers of water. Try finding that with a drone, especially a surface drone, and trying to find it. Let alone even the air drones. The air drones that were used are not that long distance capable, so they're not going to be hovering around looking for this tanker out in the open sea for very long. And they came in hard in basically a swarm outfit. So what the Russian government has already said is for all tankers coming into Russia to reflag to Russian flags. So far, they've been hitting third country flags. Reflag Russian flags, that's an act of war against Russia. Go ahead and hit us. If it's a British, then it's a declaration of war by the British. If it's Bulgaria doing it or Romania doing it, it's a declaration of war by Bulgaria and Romania on the high seas. So we'll see how that works. Alternatively, especially in the north, across the Baltic Sea, the Russian shipping is going to be, it's already had this done once or twice with military escorts. So probably run convoys with military escorts ready to fire, and any any EU or NATO ship that's trying to block them or trying to land on them. So I mean, this is a wartime, and now we're going further and further into wartime effects. And believe me, if there was a convoy, there'll be submarines somewhere around there too, just as it added firepower. So if Europe, the Western European powers really want a war, I mean, they're really itching for a war, they'll get a war. I hope they're not. I hope there's some amount of sanity left in whatever's inbred elites are sitting in the European Commission, non-elected elites. But unfortunately, I think we are heading to a bigger war, at least a bigger conglomeration that will spark something that may stop at just a spark, or it may continue burning and then turn into a wildfire. Hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think that assessment might be correct because you probably saw the interview or the speech Putin gave in his military fatigues, and he essentially made this talk that our interest in this deal of Ukraine pulling out of Donetsk is close to zero now in terms of our interest. So, in other words, the former deal appears to be going away as they will ramp up. And U.S. General Michael Flynn, he went out tweeting that the best war plans leave a lot of options open because you want to have all these alternatives, different paths to go until the last minute. That's when all the other alternatives are taken off the plate and you go for one thing. And he seemingly interpreted that this is what Putin is now doing by simply observing Putin's appearances in terms of how he's dressed and also the content of his speech. That well, as Michael Flynn's words, the ambiguity is now gone, and it appears that the policies will change dramatically. I guess my main concern is when I look around Europe. I mean, most people, I don't think, see the severity of the direction we're going down. Even when I remember back earlier this year when there were attacks on Russia's nuclear deterrent. Kind of the consensus across the media was, well, Ukraine has a right to strike back. They were attacked by Russia. Why shouldn't they respond against the planes that attack them? But I don't think they understand the significance. First of all, attacking the nuclear deterrent of Russia in a proxy war. And the FSB even recognized that the British were, deeply involved in this attack as well, on Russia's nuclear deterrent. I mean, this is almost unthinkable during the Cold War that anyone would go to this extent. And but they're only talking in these normative ways that, oh, well, what is fair? Russia did this to Ukraine. It's not fair. Ukraine should be able to attack back. But when you look at who's behind the attacks and what they're attacking, this is really World War III stuff we're talking about. And so we're going up this escalation ladder, and people are talking about this as their children. It's quite frightening. I think a lot of belligerence is making way because of a lot of stupidity which is covering over. I think in such a war everyone would effectively lose. But how do you make sense of this speech by Putin? Do you see now that the policies will begin to harden? Of course, it depends on these negotiations, but I'm not sure if they're just for show. It doesn't seem to make much sense. I'll have to say though, I heard 90%, according to the US side of the peace deal, was done, except for the NATO stuff and the territory stuff. So essentially the core of the matter. Yeah.
Market Garden, they got 90% of the way. That last bridge was the bridge too far. As the movie, as the books, it was the bridge too far. So yeah, if 90% is on flat ground, the last 10% is Mount Everest, and you just can't climb Mount Everest. That's the whole point. It doesn't matter if it's the 1%. If you have a point where neither side will move, everything gets settled on a battlefield. Problem is for the West, in particular for the U.S., the leverage of these negotiations is evaporating every single day by square kilometers and quite a few square kilometers every single day, and with thousands of dead Ukrainian soldiers every single day without exception. Let's just review the what is happening on the battlefield right now. So Mirigrad is over. There's just cleanup operations and a few holdouts here and there. The Pokrovsk relief operation never really got going before it got whacked because it was coming up. So I mean, it's the videos coming out of there. These guys are just basically destroyed driving down roads trying to speed in. What Gulai Polye, when it fell in 2 weeks, basically. It fell so quickly, the last part, the Ukrainians took off running so quickly that when the Russian forces overran the headquarters units, the computers were on. They weren't even password protected. They didn't have time to block the screen, let alone destroy the computers. That screen's on, they just ran. So the videos were showing these computers, all these monitors are still on. Come in there, see what they're talking about. You got full access. Switch off the password control right there, and start digging in on their intel. So that means that basically morale just collapsed instantly. And as the forward units started running, and they were running past the headquarter units, and the headquarter units said, "Oh crap! Now we're the forward units. Let's run." When panic hits that hard, that means it's entire collapse of any discipline, of any control. That you do not destroy your equipment, you don't burn documents, you don't evacuate them. I mean, in a headquarters unit, if you got a top secret computer, that computer is much more valuable than any rifle anybody else in that unit, because one guy can get killed. That's a tragedy. That computer gets lost. That could get a lot of people killed. Plus, whatever secrets you're holding that probably should never be leaked to the world. So all these computers were up and running. So that tells you that morale has totally collapsed. Now, what is Gulai Polye? North of Gulai Polye is about a 50-kilometer, maybe actually less than that, zone of fortifications that's now been flanked from the north, is now flanked from the south. So if the Ukrainians stay in those fortifications, they die. If they make a run for it, most will die. Some will get through because it's closing out. But the problem is for them, running is now across mostly open terrain. And here we start the problem for the Ukrainian side, that most of Zaporizhzhia is flat and open. They lost their eastern flank totally. Total collapse of the eastern flank. The main fortress being Gulai Polye, which, by the way, it's two words combined to one, Gulai and Polye. Everybody keeps pronouncing it, and for some reason, Gulai Polye. Gulai Polye, which means tumbleweed in English, if you translate that. So the city of tumbleweed. They've from here to Zaporizhzhia city is 60 kilometers straight shot. So you still have Ukrainian forces on the south trying to hold the Russian forces that are advancing north, while north of them is going to be a breakthrough by Russian forces moving to the north of them. So they either fall back or they get destroyed. It's surround and destroy it from three sides. It's just going to roll up that entire defensive line. They are Zaporizhzhia. I'm not going to call it lost. I mean, it is lost. But the Zaporizhzhia front, I'm not going to say how long it takes. It depends how fast Russia decides to move. The weather there is pretty atrocious. It's not frozen. We've just now gotten actual winter in Moscow, and it's come with a vengeance, snowing every day. But down there, it's defrost, freeze, defrost, mud, a lot of mud. So that's going to save them somewhat because heavy equipment is still going to be sluggishly moving across that kind of terrain. But the fact is, Russia has their dominance. Russia has missile dominance. Russia has in areas heavy drone dominance. It doesn't have FPV drone dominance, but it can concentrate a lot of FPV assets in a single area. And Russia has armor dominance. And in this case, it's outmaneuvering from a three-directional attack. It's just going to roll up their front. So I would, if I was a guessing man or a betting man, better yet, I'd say anywhere from 2 to 3 months, most of Zaporizhzhia front will be collapsed and destroyed completely. Probably Zaporizhzhia city being either under siege or invested or partially invested. It's very hard to defend Zaporizhzhia city. It's in an open, flat area. Has one major bridge across the Dnieper. It can be. You can, of course, come down the eastern the eastern bank of the Dnieper and continue overland, but you're in an open area. So anything coming in from the north side is going to be subject to a lot of attrition. Then we look at the Donbas itself, or in this particular case, the Donetsk People's Republic. And again, the front, we have 100-kilometer frontage that's basically open. That's that goes right into Poltava and right into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. The last fortifications are gone. The last major fortifications, new fortification belts that they're digging desperately, are mostly in open fields, unprepared villages, and they don't have the manpower. You look at Kupiansk; they threw everything they could, and if you notice, every offensive is getting so much smaller. You had the in 23, you in end of 22, you had Kharkov, and you had Kherson counteroffensives. In 23, you had Zaporizhzhia counteroffensive, was already a lot smaller because they lost a lot of men and equipment. There they lost basically their second army, rebuilt army, the second rebuild. Then you've had the Kursk offensive. That if you ever actually looked at the Kursk offensive, not the maps that the West put out, but an actual map, you saw that they captured 10% of the oblast. It's far from the biggest Russian oblast. So that really was actually a relatively small piece of ground, all things considered. Even though the West was blowing panic, like tomorrow Kursk City, which was still like 50 kilometers away from them, and the day after it'll be Moscow. But the reality was everything's getting smaller and smaller in scope. And now the big counteroffensive was just Western Kupiansk, and that's over, and that's been destroyed. And Russian forces are already moving past Kupiansk in the south of Kupiansk. So the whole front is collapsing. Once Krasnoy Liman is fully cleared, you'll have Slavinsk basically surrounded from the north, and that conglomeration already there's fighting going on in Konstantinovka. So you've got two major cities left that are not invested yet at all, and one that's about a third invested. So what's left? The Donbas is done, and after this, it's just a matter of how much territory in Sumy, in Chernogov. Chernogov hasn't been started yet, but in Sumy, in Kharkov, in Dnieper, and sooner or later in Dnipropetrovsk. Sooner or later in Poltava is going to be in Russian hands. And Kharkov, let's not forget, that's about 30 kilometers, and Russia's moving. Sumy's, the Russian front has started moving again. That's less than 20 kilometers to Sumy. I mean, we're not talking huge distances to surround these cities. And with the power out, most of the civilians are going to leave if they haven't already left. They can't survive. The cold is arriving, the actual winter cold. Kharkov is much colder than going down to Avdiivka. There's a big enough distance there and difference. A lot of people will leave, and that's the whole point in this case. Switching those areas off is to get the people to leave, because then fighting in that city is going to be much more, much easier without the Ukrainians being able to use civilians as human shields.
I think that the command post being abandoned in this way in Gallipoli was an indicator of what will come, because we always see this, that when wars enter their final stages, casualties always goes through the roof, much like Germany at the end of World War II. And as you suggest, this is always this cascading effect. If there's panic, there's more desertions, there's going to be less recruitment, there's going to be more surrenders, there's going to be the disconnection of communication lines, weakening supply lines, international support is pulling back as nobody wants to bet on the losing horse. And you can kind of see where this goes, and it's kind of frustrating that it doesn't seem to affect very much, at least in Europe, the way they look at the way they should approach this conflict in terms of at least starting to talk to the Russians, pick up a phone. I mean, we should, at some point, things will change so fast from day to day. We wish we would have some people on the ground talking and been in the middle of at least a process. Instead, everything would have to start from scratch, and then once we start from scratch is after we actually lost, which is it boggles the mind. But